So it began, although I didn't realize it, when I was in my early teens. And usually a particular trauma is kind of time-stamped in your life, but honestly how self-absorbed you are when you're a kid, it was ultimately kind of forgettable. And life has a way of, taking things that are abnormal and remarkable and making them normal when you're a kid. And it's not until later on you look back on those things and under close scrutiny you think, oh, fuck, that was kind of crazy. So, for ground zero of what manifested into panic attacks and anxiety for me was when my mother had a stroke when I was a kid. And in that time, I sort of have three memories that I always go back to, three distinct memories that are kind of littered amongst this messy mosaic of feelings and distorted ideas. Some necessary context, my mother, she was in her mid-30s and she had a rare condition where she had a small hole in her heart. So that meant like extra blood would pump up into her brain, and ultimately that clotted and shut down the left hemisphere of her brain and paralyzed the right side of her body. And the first memory that I always go to, I was sitting at my computer at home actually. I'd gotten home from school and I was on the internet upstairs. We just upgraded from our 28 kilobyte modem to our 56 kilobyte modem, so it was primo speeds. I was listening to Eazy-E's masterpiece, Real Motherfucking G's, which I picked up on a compilation from Sanity, and nothing resonated with my sort of white trash, like relatively privileged lifestyle than Eazy dissing Dre and Snoop after NWA broke up, which happened when I was like 5 years old. So I'm sitting in my room and my uncle burst through the door, and my uncle Philip, he was actually an alcoholic and he was living with us trying to clean up. And that would seem weird, but like I said before, life has a way of normalizing everything. And also he wasn't the first alcoholic uncle that had lived with us and treated our house like rehab. That's kind of a different story. So he burst through the door, and as you know, bursting into a 13-year-old's room without knocking, especially a 13-year-old with an internet connection, is just asking to create some memories that you cannot unsee. But we did have dial-up, so it was okay. So he burst into my room, I should say, and he's like, Matt, you got to get off the internet, your mum's sick. And my first reaction to that is just disbelief. I thought he was joking, which is just such a clever prank. 13-year-old me was a comedic genius. But he persisted. He's like, no, get off the internet, you need to call an ambulance right now. So I unplugged the internet, I grabbed the phone, and I walked down the stairs. And I get to the top of the stairs and I see my mum, and at that age, your mum's like your protector. She's the smartest and strongest woman in the world. And she's in our living room, she's just kind of vomited everywhere. And that stage, just adrenaline just kicks in, and I grab the phone and I call up the ambulance and I give them our address. I'm deliberate, I'm focused. I give them the code to our gate and I'm like, you just got to get here now. And then they threw me for a loop. The operator just said one little thing. She just says, what's wrong? As in, what's wrong, what's going on in the situation? But for me, I was like, what's wrong? God. So I just sort of clenched up and I just froze, and I just was sort of gurgled out like, please just hurry or she's going to die. So of course they sent an ambulance. At that point my uncle, he looks over to me, sees that I'm kind of clenched up and a bit upset, and he's like, oh, you pull it together, you got to calm down, which was really rich coming from him, but that was a conversation that needed to happen later. But, so in the interim I called up my sister, and she was obviously very upset. She had no idea what was going on, and then I sort of had to wait for the ambulance to get there, and I just remember looking at my mum and just sort of begging her to stay awake, because I thought if her eyes closed then it would be like the last time. But fortunately the ambulance arrived, and then not long after that we're in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and me and Philip up front, Sam following behind on the Smith Street Highway heading to, if anyone knows the old Gold Coast Hospital on the Gold Coast at Southport, it was a decrepit old shithole that should have been condemned 30 years ago. But yeah, so we pull up there, and that actually gets to the second memory that I always go to, is we pulled up into the emergency car park, and they wheeled my mother out of the hospital, out of the ambulance, and take her into the hospital, and the paramedics like, we need one next of kin to go in with her. I'm not sure why that's the rule, but they're like, one, and then Philip, my uncle's like, yeah, that's me, which makes sense, he's the adult, and I obviously didn't know what I was doing, but neither of us sort of realized that as soon as he disappeared through those doors, that he'd just kind of left a 13-year-old kid standing alone in a hospital driveway, like not knowing what to do and wondering if my mum was about to die. And then, thankfully, my sister turned up not long after that, and she's like, where is she? Where's Mum? And I'm like, oh, she's in there. They said only one of us could go in, so I'm here waiting for you, I guess. And then she's like, well, why aren't you in there? Why aren't I in there? She was just obviously frazzled and upset, but in my mind, I'm just thinking, it's because I'm a fucking kid and I have no idea how to deal with this situation. And, but I didn't say anything, obviously, and that became a problem for me later in life, is that I wouldn't say anything. And that sort of brought a lot of that position of helplessness I should say, and vulnerability, sort of brought a lot of things to the forefront for me later in life. And when those emotions would come up later in life, that's one of the memories I would jump to, and I didn't quite realize why. But then we had sort of the ensuing rehab that followed, so I'd go from school to hospital, and yeah, see my mum and then go back to school, then back to hospital. And at school I sort of created this character that I would play, this extroverted, sort of loutish, protective casing, so no one would take like a closer lens, look at my life and realise I was just angry and confused and acting out for attention. But then I'd be back at hospital and I'd see mum relearning to talk and relearning to walk and relearning how to take care of herself. And I think the only metaphor I can come up with for that is I felt a lot like a teenage parent, in the sense that I had this tremendous responsibility of just being there, but I was completely unequipped to help in any way. And yeah, so that kind of really messed me up for a while. And because I couldn't talk about it, I started to sort of, develop a bit of introversion and would sort of start questioning things, life and death and all the things we think about. And that sort of goes into the third memory, is every night after going to the hospital, I'd get home and I'd be home by myself and I'd have my little time to process and recoup. And that's something I always needed, and I'd be brooding and angsty, which if you're a teenager is completely normal, so it never garnered any investigation, even though I was really struggling with this double life I was living as a carer and a student. So I'd be at home and I'd be listening to music, or I'd be reading a book, or I'd be more likely trying to hit on a girl on MSN Messenger from school. And that's sort of a phase I never grew out of. The brooding and angsty, not the MSN Messenger. Yeah. So yeah, I still, like to this day, I kind of need to be left alone, I guess, to process feelings. And when I'm not left alone, I kind of lash out with this sort of juvenile anger, and it's kind of really silly. But yeah, so where was I? MSN Messenger really threw me for a loop there. So I started having panic attacks when I was about 20, and I didn't realise straight away that they were probably due to the fact I developed these ideas about fragility and vulnerability when I was a kid. And instead of I think seeing my mother get sick when she was a kid really drilled into me the idea that sickness and even the possibility of death was a reality that I'd have to confront at some stage, but instead I just panicked, I just had like this fearful resignation every time I'd have a dizzy spell or like a pain in my shoulder. I thought, I'm about to have a stroke, I'm about to have a heart attack, even though it's completely unlikely to occur at my age. And I just completely disregarded the idea that those things can be completely random and just kind of happen. So after years of sort of dealing with that, I did something kind of interesting. I went back to being a kid, I just normalized it. After you live with it for so long, it just kind of became normal for me. And life sort of took away the power from it, and it took away the abnormality of it, and I just started to deal with it in that way. And even more so, I started to read about anxiety a lot, and I realized it is completely and utterly normal. Like, everyone deals with anxiety with differing severity and differing success. And reading those people's stories let me kind of feel less excluded from reality, and also let me feel understood without ever really having to talk about my problems. And so that's kind of why stories mean a lot to me. They've kind of always been there for me, and they're not really about entertainment or enjoyment. They're more about sort of just listening to someone else's story and gleaning something from their life and using that to reflect on my own life. And because everyone has a story, that really quells my fear and my anxiety and my vulnerability. And even though I still think a lot of my life is a bit weird in some ways, I can sort of listen to other people's stories and treat those three memories like they are. They're just stories. They're all things that happen, but like everyone else's stories, they're just stories. And that lets me feel normal about it. Thanks, guys.